We do have some breaking news just coming in. We do have some breaking news just coming in from the Supreme Court. I want to get straight over to CNN's Caitlin Polans, who's pulling together the details from us. And this has to do with President Trump's moves to freeze foreign aid. Caitlin, what's happened?
Yeah, Kate, what had happened in the Trump administration is they turned off money going to nonprofits and contractors on foreign aid, people that were working with the organization USAID, the agency that the Trump administration was trying to shut down.
Foreign aid, Caitlin, what's happened?
Yeah, Kate, what had happened in the Trump administration is they turned off money going to nonprofits and contractors on foreign aid, people that were working with the organization USAID, the agency that the Trump administration was trying to shut down. And what the Supreme Court, what Trump wanted to do is he wanted a green light from the Supreme Court to keep that money shut off. It's being litigated at the trial level courts far below the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court just said is, we're not going to do that. We need the lower court to figure this out. There was a judge there who had set a deadline for the administration to pay up $2 billion by midnight of a day last week, was giving them less than 24 hours to do it. And the administration said, we can't just turn money back on like that. That's why we need the Supreme Court's help here to let us do what we want with our bills and just not pay them, freeze all the money that was outgoing. And now it's going to go back down to the lower court. But Kate, when you step back and look at what's happening in this order right here, it's 5-4. And the 4 dissenters of what is being done right now for Donald Trump, those people are all of the conservative justices. And what they are saying is, we can't believe that this Supreme Court is going to override what the executive wants to do here and just give this lower court trial judge, Judge Ali in Washington, D.C. on the district court, the power to figure this out right now. So a big struggle between the court system and Trump as president ongoing that we're going to keep seeing happen in the courts. Kate?
I was going to say, my take is like, this is not the last time this conflict and struggle is going to be playing out and making its way back to the Supreme Court. This is the beginning of a very long road here, but an important decision coming from the justices nonetheless. Caitlin, thank you so much for jumping on so quick for us.
Here with us to break all of this down. It's very, very significant. CNN's chief legal affairs correspondent, Paula Reed. This was an incredibly fast decision by the U.S. Supreme Court.
It was, and it's rare that the Supreme Court drops a decision on us at 9 o'clock in the morning. And look, this decision was pretty technical, but it really reveals a lot about the divides within the court itself. This is the second time that Trump's efforts to reshape the federal government have gone up to the high court. And here specifically, the Trump administration was asking the court to keep foreign aid frozen, but the court declined to do that. They actually sent that whole issue back down to the lower court to decide if those funds need to be released. Now, this is the second time that the Supreme Court has declined to intervene on Trump's behalf, but I want to note the larger questions about what Trump can and cannot do with DOJ, with this kind of foreign aid. Those questions have not been answered. The Supreme Court has not weighed in on what we call the merits or the larger constitutional questions. That's going to take some time. But again, twice they've asked the Supreme Court to help them out, and twice they have declined.
And basically, correct me if I'm wrong, the House of Representatives and the Senate both passed authorizing legislation for these billions of dollars in foreign aid. Then they passed separate appropriations bills, and then the president signed both bills into law. The Supreme Court saying if you want to change that, there's got to be additional legislation on the Hill and more action by the president.
So I think eventually the Supreme Court will have to get at that issue. Right now, the issue they're deciding is really whether a district court judge can compel the administration to pay these billions of dollars in foreign aid that they're saying they don't want to. So it's interesting. There was a really lengthy dissent in this decision where 4 conservative justices were sort of outraged at the idea that a district court could compel the administration to do that. Eventually, though, they will have to answer these larger constitutional questions that you just touched on. If Congress, appropriates these funds, can the administration just say, no, we're not going to send them out? Those questions will likely take a few months to get to the court because it has to go back to the lower court and work its way through the system. And the Supreme Court really isn't looking to jump the line right now.
Yeah, that would be the bigger constitutional question, right? What is the direct impact then of this?
So right now it's going to go back down to the lower court, and the litigation over this larger question will begin, and the district court can decide if the administration has to disperse these funds. I think what really stood out to me in this decision, though, is again, this is very preliminary. This is a very technical issue. We're not answering these larger questions yet about the separation of powers. But 4 justices, they all got together and they wrote a really powerful dissent. And what's notable about that is this is, again, like I said, it's not a minor decision, but it's not a massive decision. And the fact that they all took time to really lay out why they disagree with the majority, that signals that there really are pretty entrenched partisan divides on this court. And that will be incredibly significant when these larger constitutional questions do come before them in the usual formal way where there are arguments and a big opinion. Because I know from talking to my sources at the Trump White House, their long game for all of these efforts with DOJ and reshaping the federal government are designed to eventually go before the Supreme Court, and they expect that they will likely side with President Trump. It's going to be that's a long game, that's a long path, but that's how all of this has been designed. They knew these would be challenged in court. They didn't expect to win initially, but they do expect to win at the high court.
The Chief Justice, John Roberts, was the tiebreaker.
Exactly here. Yeah, he just said, look, we're going to send this down. We're not going to keep this frozen. We're going to send this down to the district court and they can handle it. But I think everyone expects that one of these big DOJ-related cases is likely going to come back before the Supreme Court in the coming months.
Excellent explanation, Paula Reed. Thank you very, very much.
And it is interesting on the heels because we saw President Trump briefly talking to Chief Justice Roberts last night.
He said thank you to him.
He said
I don't know
thank
if he
you,
knew
I'll
about
never
this
forget it.
decision.
We don't know what he was talking about, but it's just such a fascinating dynamic.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you so much. I want to continue this discussion with CNN senior legal analyst Elie Honig. So how are you viewing this, Elie? Just such a fascinating dynamic.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you so much. I want to continue this discussion with CNN senior legal analyst Elie Honig. So how are you viewing this, Elie?
Well, Pam, I think this is a substantial setback for the Trump administration. Now, the winning side here, the challengers, they had argued in the lower courts that essentially the president has no power to block this federal funding because Congress had already allocated it. And under Article 1 of the Constitution, Congress has the power to tax and spend. That was ultimately the argument that prevailed here. Now, the other side of it, the Trump administration and the dissenters in this case argue, first of all, the district court judge had no power to do what he did, that he overstepped. Second of all, that the way this case was brought by private businesses was procedurally improper. And third, the dissenting conservative justices argue what we, the Supreme Court, should have done is put this whole thing on hold so that we could have the full rounds of briefing and argument that we'd ordinarily have. And as the dissent correctly notes, the practical impact of this is that $2 billion is almost certainly going to get out the door and nobody can stop it at this point.
When can that happen? That's what I'm trying to get at, just sort of the direct impact from this.
Yeah.
Yes, they're sending it back to the lower court, but what does it mean for that aid that's frozen right now?
So, as Paula said, the Supreme Court has now sent this case back to the district court, the trial level court. And this is the same judge who previously ordered the federal government, you cannot block this, you need to get it out the door. He gave him something like 36 hours to get it out the door. Well, now the Supreme Court has said back to the district court, yes, district court judge, you do have jurisdiction and authority to order that this money be paid, and you need to work with the parties to get this money out the door in a way that's quick, but also feasible, not impossible from a technical point of view.
So what does this tell us about pending disputes about federal funding, international funding with USAID and also within the U.S. domestic funding?
Yeah, this is why I think this case is so important, because we need to get ready. We're going to see a whole series of these lawsuits about DOJ, the firings, the withholding of federal funding. They are making their way through the federal courts as we speak. And this is one of the first two, really, to reach the Supreme Court. In general, this is a conservative Supreme Court. In general, this court is going to side with broad conceptions of executive power, of presidential power. However, I think one big exception we need to watch for, and we see it in this case, is when it comes to federal funding, because these justices are conservative, but they can read the Constitution. And again, Article 1, the very first enumerated power is given to Congress. So if Congress has decided to spend money, I think under a strict reading of the Constitution, then the president cannot block it. So watch for that pattern, I think, to repeat itself in the coming weeks and months, generally siding with the president, but not necessarily on these issues of withholding federal funding.
What is the significance, in your view, of how the justices split in this ruling?
Yeah, so a really interesting breakdown here. We had the Chief Justice and Justice Amy Coney Barrett siding with the 3 liberals to give a 5-4 majority. And again, I think when we look forward, you're basically going to have the three liberal justices, Jackson, Sotomayor, and Kagan. They're generally going to be locked in against broad executive power, against the Trump administration. It's a safe bet moving forward to count on elite justices Alito and Thomas and Gorsuch basically being in favor of executive power. And so that leaves us really 3 justices in the middle, the Chief Justice, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, who are going to serve more or less as the swing. Now, we know they're conservatives, but as you see in this case, if the liberals can win over 2 of those 3, then they can actually pull out a decision here and there.
All right, Ali Honig, as always, thank you so much.